Welcome to the Speak and Get What You Want podcast, where you learn to communicate like the world's most successful leaders. Now, here are your hosts, TK Stratton and Chad Kirby. Okay, welcome everyone to the Speak and Get What You Want podcast. TK, jumping into a subject today that I think is critically important for anyone who wants to be successful. And as we know, how you communicate is what enables you to experience that success. And you were just mentioning to me right before we hopped onto the podcast, TK, you mentioned that you did a little research on some of the greatest communicators and speakers.
Yeah, I think that's how we can really learn to better ourselves is watch people who are the best, And if you just do a quick Google search, okay, who are the greatest speakers who ever walked the face of the earth, And different lists have different names, but some of the common names that you see amongst those are guys like Winston Churchill and Mr. Rogers, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, Fred Rogers, Martin Luther King, Adolf Hitler, is on there. And, like any of these people or hate them, whatever, we're just looking for effective communicators who are very successful. And there's some commonalities I think that we can all learn from on how they just so eloquently spoke their message to really get so many people's buy-in on whatever they were. And some of them are, to this day, some of the greatest speeches that have ever existed. And I think it ties right into what you're talking about, Chad, is connecting with people. One of the most common commonalities between all of them is they had the ability to authentically have a conversation with the audience rather than give a lecture. And I think that's a huge thing that comes along with connect, and it's because they were able to connect. And so I'm love hearing what you have to say on how we can all improve our ability to connect with people, because that's the world's greatest speakers. That's what they did.
And you know what? It's interesting because today in our podcast, we're talking about how you can increase your connection so that you can be more effective in your communication. And TK, you said two things there as you were unpacking these successful speakers. And one of them was you said they would get buy-in from their audience. And just curiosity, why use the words buy-in?
I think we have to get people's buy-in on their willingness to even listen to us, because if they're going to give us the energy like you've always talked about, people don't want to think, so they have, if they're going to think, it better be something they can, that's worth investing that energy into, like you've always mentioned. And so the world's greatest speakers, if you look at those commonalities between them, they had that one ability. It's really common among all of them, is they had the ability to authentically, it says specifically, authentically have a conversation with the audience rather than lecture. And I think we've both been to both. I've been to speeches and events where it literally felt like a lecture, and I don't remember anything about it because I probably checked out. And I've been to others that I can remember the speech very clearly on everything that they said because it was so engaging. And so I'd love to hear from what you think can help us all be better communicators, better speakers, with making those connections that those greatest speakers have been able to make.
Well, and I find it interesting. You bring up Fred Rogers, right? And Mr. Rogers, and obviously I grew up watching Mr. Rogers, and maybe you saw some of his reruns, TK, being a decade behind me, but you certainly know who he is. And then Tom Hanks, I think, did a fantastic job years ago in the movie depicting the life of Fred Rogers. But you mentioned something that I think is interesting when you said he was good at having a conversation with his audience rather than lecturing his audience.
Right.
And that's interesting you say that, because TK, he was a TV personality. So his audience was at home, and yet he had that ability to connect with them because he was creating a conversation rather than just speaking to them. He was speaking with them.
Right. He's incredible to read about, and when you watch his show or some of the speeches that he gave, you can learn a ton. from these guys. It's just watching how they did it. Kind of if you pay attention, you learn a lot just watching some of these great speakers like Fred Rogers. I've watched some of his speeches. He's incredible.
Well, and he had this incredible ability to connect, as you mentioned already, and he did that well. And we were going to discuss three specific ways to increase connection. And I'm glad you brought up Fred Rogers, because the very first thing we mentioned, if you're looking to connect and you're saying, okay, Chad, TK, I hear what you're saying. I want to be better at connecting. The number one way, or certainly one of the top ways to get better at connecting, is creating time to make the connection. We live in a world, TK, where everything is instantaneous and it happens so fast. I mean, I live in Idaho, you live in Arizona. So you live in a more Amazon friendly community than even me. And being in Southeast Idaho, I order something, it takes a day or two. But you were telling me that if you run out of toothpaste or something at 10 o'clock at night, you can Amazon order it and it's there for you in the morning.
Yeah, it's
And and
amazing.
and so we're living in a world where everything comes quick and rapid. Well, one thing that doesn't come quick and rapid in most cases is connection. You have to take the time to connect with people. And as I've done limited research on Fred Rogers, my understanding was he always paused and was present, taking the time to connect with people.
Hmm.
And he was never
Yeah.
trying to speed things up. He was never trying to move super fast. He would always be present and speak with people and talk to people and take the time to connect. And
Interesting.
and some and sometimes, TK, people just don't want to have to do it. You and I were talking a few days ago about in one of your previous businesses, you had one individual who was a referral source for you, who would refer multiple millions of dollars worth of work to you.
Mhm.
And so you're like, okay, I want to create a deeper connection with him. So how did you do it? How did you and his name was Tim, and he was giving you multiple millions of dollars worth of work.
Yeah, and he's an incredible individual, just genuinely just a good person. But, what he liked is just time. He liked just me coming in his office and sitting down and talking with him, and sometimes that would go on for a couple hours. And that's what he wanted. He just really craved that personal connection, like what you said, and so I did the best I could with it. And it made it somewhat easy because he was a genuine friend. He was just a good
Right.
person.
Isn't that okay? Wait, back up real quick. You said it was easy because he was just a genuine friend. Now, obviously, that friendship and that connection brought you a lot of money, but that's not why you really did it. And so
Right.
you took the time to do it, but number two is you have to be authentic in that connection as well. You
Right.
have to really care about the individual and want to connect. And going back to Fred Rogers, he did care deeply about other people, and he took that time to really create that connection. It was interesting when you sold that business. The next person, you told the person that purchased the business that this is a great referral source, and he's looking for connection, and he'll continue to give you millions and millions of dollars worth of work, but you just need to take the time to be genuine and authentically connect with him. And this person, this next group, chose not to do that. Why do you think, TK, people don't want to just take the time to authentically connect?
I know that's a good question, probably for all of us. That we because all of us struggle with that. Because it takes time, it takes effort, and some of us, including myself, when we don't want to do it, that's it takes time, it takes effort. You know
It, it,
that
it, re-
that
it
can be the most rewarding is if when we spend time on those relationships and with those people.
TK, I had a good friend who said a few weeks back he was reading an article on the importance. He has a young family, and he was reading an article on the importance of being present for your children, especially when they're young. And when they come in and they, when they ask you a question, right, just be present for them. And he was reading this article, and one of his kids kept trying to ask him questions, and he really became irritated. And he finally just stopped, and he was like, "What do you need? What do you need?" And they're like, "Oh, sorry, Dad, never mind. I'll come back later." And then he paused because the irony of him reading an article on the importance of being present for your children. And he's like, "Ugh, I don't want to take the time for this. I'm trying to read this article on the importance of spending time." Right. And so it happens. It certainly happens to all of us. And,
Yeah.
and
I
really,
noticed that with my kids, there's sometimes to sit there and listen is so hard. And sometimes it's easy, because I love my kids. And I can probably even do it better with my kids than I can my wife, and she's great. But I end to check out, it's just something I have to work on myself. But with my kids, I try and put that extra effort because I know that's what makes them feel the most loved and wanted, is just that time, when you can really sit and listen to what's important to them.
yeah, which brings us that first one, authentically spending that time. But number two, TK, is in creating connection. And you and I had someone tell me in business that this is something that this is one of the most critical things you can do to be successful in business. And that is number two is just listening to create
Yeah.
connection. Number one, spend time, but two, really listen to what the person is saying. And people just aren't doing that anymore. People don't listen anymore. They're too busy thinking about other things. They're moving quickly. They don't really pause to listen to what other people are saying.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and you mentioned your kids and your wife. My wife, she tells me things that I know she doesn't tell me everything she says she tells me, because I'm normally listening to everything, but it's just something that, okay, how can I be a better listener? Because if we really want to connect, people will tell you everything that matters to them. And TK,
Yeah.
you've shared stories before on this very podcast where you've gone into extremely important business deals where you just listened to really hear what the person wanted. And then once you listened to them, they told you everything they wanted and allowed you to make that connection.
Yeah. I have an uncle that's he's a professional negotiator. That's what he does.
Hmm.
He helps negotiate deals. He's really helped me and just been kind of a good coach for me and someone I can bounce things off. Sometimes I'll call him and say, "Hey, how do I handle this situation?" But one simple thing he told me is when he really is a good listener. He focuses on listening because it's hard, and he says it's still hard for him to just shut his mouth. But he says a lot of times what he'll listen to what someone has to say. Let's say it's on a deal,
Hmm.
and just they'll kind of just go off on their story and express what they're wanting, and then he'll, when they're done and they stop speaking, he'll then repeat, "Okay, so you'd like this to happen and this to happen, or this rate, interest rate, whatever it is." And then he asked these two words, which are, in my opinion, so powerful. He said, "Okay, what else?" And then he just pauses. And that's when you really get the meat out of what they're really wanting to say. And I've learned a ton out of those two words. Okay. Letting them know that you heard what they said by repeating back to them what you understood, and when they confirm that yes, that's correct, that you understood correctly, saying, "Okay, what else?" Sometimes there's nothing else, but even if you ask them that question, it really got through their minds that you're listening and that you care, and
Right.
that's gone a long ways with me.
That is awesome. I love that. I love that insight. I hope everyone listened closely to that because, TK, I one of the best people I know in sales is a gentleman by the name of Jerome King. He's a phenomenal sales guy, and he's trained and built these incredible sales organizations. Well, he learned this lesson that you're just sharing with us now. Early in his career, he started selling used cars. Okay. And it was his first day, or one of his first days on the job, and there was a couple out in the lot. in the car lot looking at different cars. And the owner of the dealership turned to him and said, "Hey, go talk to them." So he went out to them and he said, "Hey, how are you?" Ask him a couple questions, and then the person, he came back in, and the owner of the dealership goes, "Jerome, what happened?" He goes, "Oh, they're just looking." And the owner of the dealership said, "Hey, Jerome, just so you know, there are two things that everyone hates. One, going to funerals, and two, buying a new car. They are not there just wandering. You weren't listening because you weren't asking the right question. You therefore weren't listening to what they really want." He said, "Go out there and listen to what they want." And Jerome went back out to the lot, talked to them, and ended up selling them a car the next day
Amazing.
because he was listening, and he took that, and he's gone on, and TK's had just unbelievable success in the sales industry, teaching and training sales teams, and every team he goes to has incredible success because of what your uncle taught him and what the owner of that dealership taught him, right? Well, what your
Yeah.
uncle taught you and what the ownership of the dealership taught him. Because listen, you have to listen, and if you're listening closely, then you can create and deliver that connection.
And going back to the world's greatest speakers, I think that's what they were really good at. They
Mm,
were really good at listening to their audience and what they wanted and focusing on that. So that's what they would focus on, is what they heard, you know.
right?
And you look at the other commonality. There's just a couple more I'll mention with these guys that I think is really worth sharing and us really learning from. They were, all of them are very direct in their message.
Mm,
And so when you look at Winston Churchill, Adolf Hitler, Martin Luther King, even Mr. Rogers, as soft spoken as he was and slow, I remember getting up early in the morning, like you, sitting on my couch. We loved Mr. Rogers, but he spoke so lovingly and kind and soft. You felt like, he was your family member, like your grandpa. But his message was very direct. As even though as soft spoken as he was, that's what he's really known for, is his message being so direct, but so loving and kind and soft. And you felt connected. I thought that was really powerful.
oh,
Um, what
absolutely.
the other one that they said is, all of these guys wrote their own speeches. Not all of them, but most of the
Wow.
most effective speakers. Some of these names that I've just mentioned, they wrote their own speeches and they would practice them multiple times. Even if you look at a guy like Adolf Hitler, all those things that we know about him, but you focus on what he was effective at. He would he would write and sometimes rewrite his speeches 5 times. They said he would stand in front of a mirror and practice his facial expressions. Winston Churchill, the same. They wrote their own and they would practice. I thought that was really interesting. That some of us, think, oh, I'm gonna create my talk or my speech and then just get ready and go give it. That is not how the world's greatest speakers operate at all. As good as they are, and their ability to get up to do that is probably incredible. But
Oh,
they've practiced and practiced, and even when they're really ready to give a speech, they practice and practice multiple times. Even their facial expressions, which we've talked about, nonverbal communication, which is just as important as what we say.
right.
I thought
Right.
that was very interesting things that all go with what you're saying with connection,
Oh,
because that all ties in.
absolutely, TK. And I was just thinking as we wrap up the listening part, time, listening, I know they go hand in hand, one and two there. But let me just add this real quick before I add the third one. You and I were talking about the world's greatest speakers, one of those today, I believe, is a gentleman by the name of Simon Sinek. And
Yeah.
he's a very gifted, talented public speaker. And Simon and I were speaking at an event together one time, and we were in the back room talking after he had spoken. And obviously he didn't know me. I knew Simon. Simon Sinek was amazing, but Chad Kirby, that didn't mean it. That name didn't mean anything to him. But his ability to stop and listen to everything that I said, and as I was talking about the content that he shared and how he was engaged and listening and thinking, and he's like, "Wow, Oh, that's great insight that you share that. And we had a wonderful, wonderful conversation because of the importance of listening, one of the great speakers. And so as you talk about the great
Interesting.
speakers of previous times, but also even present times, they have these same characteristics. They give the time, they make the effort to listen. And then the third thing I would just suggest, TK, is intentionality. Being intentional and trying to connect with people. Like it just doesn't happen. You work very hard at it, TK. When we're at a restaurant, you try and connect with the waiter or waitress. You're always trying to create connection, and it doesn't happen by accident. You have to work at it, and it's
Mhm.
something that all of us should try and be more intentional at doing. Because too often, TK, people say, "Well, I'm just not good at that." Well, I'm not just
Right.
good at that, right? But you have forced yourself. If you force yourself and be intentional, you'll be stunned at the results you experience.
Yeah, yeah, you're kind, but yeah, no, I have to work on it myself, and that's a lot of why I do it. Practice. That's what the world's greatest guys, they practice all the time, and they're exceptional. They're the best in the world, and they still practice.
Well,
And
it,
so I think we have a lot to learn.
Yeah, and TK, I guess I get a little tired of it sometimes because some people attribute all of your success to, like, because TK, you've had incredible amounts of success, but I know you well enough to where I know you've also had to work really hard and had some incredible setbacks too. And those setbacks have taught you things, and then you've been very intentional and focused on, okay, I'm actually going to do this. People will tell me, they're like, well, but TK is just gifted with the ability to connect with people. But in my mind, I'm like, yeah, but TK has not always had that gift. He's worked at it. It's something he's really practiced and been very intentional. And now, yes, he's great at it. He's phenomenal at it. But too many people just sit back and go, oh, must be nice. When reality is, there's a lot of work, effort, and focus that went into it to get you to where you are today.
Yeah. And it's fun, no matter what you've done, there's guys way more successful than you, you know. So I
Wow.
had some conversations with some developers today that again, I'm trying to create some other connections myself, but a big developer here in Phoenix, and he's done a lot of big stuff here and in New York, just amazing. And then you can learn so much about the relationships and connections he's made, and it's all through these same things that we're talking about that the world's greatest people do, with exactly what you're talking about, creating that connection
I
and
love it.
making it about them, and listening to what their needs are. And I think that's how you really create relationships, in business and in family and in life. Everything that you're talking about, that's why I think this one is really powerful, Chad.
I love it, TK. I love it. So, as we wrap up, remember, as you are looking to be, first of all, if you are saying, well, I'm not that great at creating connections, you can be. You absolutely can be, as long as you want to and you're willing to make the effort for it, TK. And as we think about
Yep.
the fact, if you do those three things, you take the time to create connection, you listen to create those connection, and then be intentional and be very focused and driven to do it, magic happens and you'll be stunned to see the success that follows creating connections. So,
Awesome.
TK, great as always being with you. Great. Love, love, love the content you shared and look forward to being with you again soon. Take care, everyone.
Awesome.
Bye now.